Hi everybody, here is your training class for shaping and chaining. So two things are on our agenda for this video. We're going to talk about shaping, we're going to talk about chaining, we'll do a summary, and then you guys will go on to Top Hat and you'll have 3 questions assigned to you, and those will be your participation questions for this training module, or this training class, sorry. Here are our objectives. So if you guys are following along with me with regards to the RBT task list, you guys can check off C11 and C6. Okay, so let's talk about shaping. I have a video for you guys, and this is Twiggy. So way back in the 1960s, there was a couple that rescued a squirrel from a hurricane, and they always thought it would be funny to see if the squirrel could actually water ski. And so they started kind of training, they named him Twiggy, training Twiggy to water ski. And so it began as a joke, and then they actually ended up teaching him to water ski, and he actually became famous. So you guys can go on, sorry, I'm not connected to the internet. You guys, I'll post, I'll show you guys Twiggy's video on Thursday, or you guys can just Google him. But you can see him, he's this squirrel, and he gets on these water skis, and he goes around. And so the question is, how did they actually teach Twiggy to water ski? And they did this by what we call shaping. And shaping is the process of systematically and differentially reinforcing successive approximations to a target behavior. So basically, you have this target behavior that the person cannot engage in at the moment. And so you start with something that you start with an initial behavior that might not look anything like the target behavior, and then you're going to reinforce that behavior as it successively gets closer to the target behavior, and then eventually you'll have the target behavior. So with Twiggy, they first put the little water skis down on the ground. When he would just come around them, they would reinforce him, and so he would start to come around the water skis, and then after he was reliably doing that, they reinforced him actually kind of climbing over the skis, and after he was reliably climbing over the skis, they reinforced him actually reaching up and holding the handlebars. After he was reliably doing that, they reinforced holding the handlebars closer to water, and then they reinforced all of that in the water, and then they reinforced him actually doing that while they were moving. So they took this behavior of just being around the water skis, and they reinforced successive approximations until they got to their target behavior of actually water skiing. And so with shaping, we use what we call differential reinforcement. So you're going to, we've talked about differential reinforcement with regards to prompting, and with shaping, we're talking about reinforcing one set of behaviors and extinguishing another. So you're going to place one set of behaviors, you're going to reinforce it, and another set of behaviors under extinction. So you start out reinforcing an initial behavior that's typically a distant approximation of the target behavior. So when we talk about Twiggy, just sniffing the skis would be the initial behavior. And then once that starting behavior occurs reliably, you stop reinforcing that and reinforce a closer approximation. So let me give you guys another example. Say you have a learner who has gotten glasses and needs to put their glasses properly on their face, and they're not engaging in that behavior. So this is a novel behavior that you need to shape up. So first day of training, first you would get your target behavior, which is placing the glasses in their proper position. And then you would get an initial behavior. Where are you starting off at? And so for this particular learner, we're going to start off at, he just has to touch his glasses. So first day of training, he touches his glasses, gets reinforcement, or gets the reinforcer. After he's reliably touching his glasses, then you're going to reinforce a more successive, a closer approximation to the target behavior, and put this other set of behaviors under extinction. So he's reliably doing that. So now we're going to put touching glasses under extinction, and we're going to reinforce him actually picking up the glasses. Once he's reliably picking up the glasses, you're going to put picking up the glasses under extinction, and you're going to reinforce putting glasses up to his face. Now, whenever you put these behaviors under extinction, you'll get that extinction burst. And if you guys remember, we talked about the extinction burst, and you might get some novel behavior. So shaping is kind of an art, and you really have to consistently monitor the learner, because once you put, for example, picking up glasses under extinction, they're going to engage in novel behaviors to get the reinforcer, and you want to catch that novel behavior of putting the glasses to your face, and then you want to reinforce that behavior. You want to reinforce immediately, because once he puts his glasses up to his face, you want to catch that behavior. If you don't catch it immediately, he might be on to a different novel behavior within the extinction burst, and then you've kind of not gone backwards, but you've slowed down your process of shaping. After he's reliably putting his glasses to his face, you'll put that under extinction, and then you'll reinforce placing the glasses in their proper positions. So that's what we mean when we talk about using differential reinforcement with regards to shaping. So I want you guys to think of, how would you use shaping to get a rat to press a lever in a Skinner box? So you put the rat in a Skinner box, and if you just wait for trial and error to occur, you just wait for the rat to press a lever, you're probably going to be waiting a really, really, really long time. So shaping up this response is more effective and more efficient. And so I want you guys to think about how you would actually do that. And the answer would be, first you would reinforce the rat going to even close to the lever. You reinforce that. Once he's reliably going close to the lever, you might reinforce him touching the lever. Or you might reinforce him rearing up. And so once he's reliably going to that side of the Skinner box and rearing up, you might reinforce him putting his paws on the lever. After he's reliably putting his paws on the lever, then you might reinforce him actually pushing the lever. And now you've shaped up a lever press. And we use shaping, basically, you can use it for a lot of different things. You can use it to establish a new response. So if you have a behavior that the kid is not, a novel behavior that the kid is not currently engaging in, then shaping is a really good procedure. Or to reinstate old responses. Or if you want to change some dimension. So if you want to change what a behavior looks like, the topography, or the frequency or the duration, or the latency or the intensity. So for example, kids in the school district or kids in the educational setting need to sit at their desk for, 40 minutes at a time. And so if you have a kid that's only sitting there for 5 minutes and starts to get up, you can actually shape up duration. And your target behavior might be 40 minutes. You might start off with 4 minutes, reinforce it, and then start increasing that duration so that you shape up those 40 minutes. Or if you guys remember at the beginning of this, the first slide of this PowerPoint, they're shaping up how to write the letter A. So first they have a prompt on there, and the A is kind of all over the place. They're reinforcing that, and then they reinforce the kid drawing a closer approximation to the actual A, and then eventually they reinforce the kid actually correctly drawing the A within the prompt. You might have a kid that talks too softly and you want to increase the intensity, so you might reinforce when he speaks a little bit louder, and then a little bit louder, and then at a normal volume. Or you might have a kid that talks too loud and you want to decrease that intensity. Those are all examples of things that you can use shaping for. There are some limitations with shaping. It is pretty time consuming, and the progress is not always linear. So you might lay out these steps that these successive approximations, and if in that extinction burst the kid doesn't engage in one of those, it might not be as linear as you planned it to be. You always need to monitor the learner, because right after he engages in a closer successive approximation, you have to reinforce that behavior immediately. If not, they're on to something else, and you might provide a reinforcer, but it might not be for a successive approximation. Shaping can be misapplied, and you can end up with a behavior that's, if you don't reinforce the behavior immediately, you can end up with a behavior that's not anything like your target behavior. And then harmful behavior can also be shaped. So you can shape appropriate behavior and you can shape harmful behavior. Remember when we talked about our extinction bursts? We had that example of crying. And if you put crying under extinction, you're going to get a longer duration of crying, a higher intensity. You might get some aggressive behavior, like we talked about kicking the wall. And so if you reinforce the behavior, if you can't go through that extinction burst and you reinforce the behavior at the top of the extinction burst, well, you've actually shaped up a more intense, more severe version of the problem behavior. So all these things come into play. Shaping behavior, you can shape appropriate or inappropriate behavior. You do not want to use shaping when the person already engages in the target behavior, just not enough. So if they're actually engaging the behavior, just not the number of times that you want them to, then you want to pick a different strategy. So you might just differentially reinforce the target behavior. So reinforce the behavior so it actually increases in frequency, and then if that's not happening, if it's not happening enough, then you can use instructions, modeling, prompts, things like that. So if the kid is maybe more higher functioning, and you can get the behavior to occur by using those instructions, modeling, or prompts, a lot of times that's a better strategy because it's more efficient. You can get the behavior to occur more quickly using prompts and modeling than you can with shaping. Remember, shaping is oftentimes time consuming. So if your kid responds to prompts and modeling, then that might be a better strategy. However, if you have a really early learner that doesn't respond necessarily so well to prompts or modeling, and they're not engaging in the behavior, then shaping is your strategy. Okay, some shaping guidelines. First, you want to define your target behavior. So figure out what is the behavior that you want the kid to ultimately engage in. Then you want to determine whether it's an appropriate procedure. So is he engaging in the problem behavior just not enough? In that case, you want to use your prompts or things like that. If he's not engaging in the problem behavior at all and he's pretty low functioning, then shaping might be the procedure for you. You want to determine your criterion for success. So when are you going to, we talked about those, the steps of successive approximation and how you're going to differentially reinforce those. So when are you going to determine that they've mastered one of those successive approximations? Identify the behavior that you're going to start with, and then choose those shaping steps. Choose your reinforcer. What are you going to reinforce the kid with? We talked about those preference assessments, things like that. And then differentially reinforce those successive approximations. And you also want to move through the shaping steps at a proper pace. So we say that shaping is an art, because whenever you actually identify those shaping steps, they can't be too easy, they can't be too difficult. If they're too easy, the learner gets bored. If they're too difficult, it's too hard for the learner. And then, you want good motivation as you're shaping, so you need to move through those steps at a proper pace. If you're having difficulty going through them, then you might have, the steps might be too far apart, so you got to go back and, break it down a little bit further and have a couple more successive approximations. So I have a video for you guys in your module for you to watch. I think she does a really good job of explaining shaping and how you use it to teach kids with autism. Okay, so now on to chaining. So if you have a complex behavior, then chaining might be a really good strategy for you to teach that complex behavior. So usually with chaining, you have a behavior that you can break down into different steps. Each response produces a stimulus change. So each mini behavior in your fixed sequence of responses, or every little component of the target skill that you're trying to teach produces a stimulus change in the environment. So it produces some type of consequence. And that consequence serves two functions. So it's a reinforcer for the response that they just emitted, and it also becomes an antecedent stimulus or an SD that evokes the next response in the sequence. So let me show you what I mean by this. Okay, so behavioral chain for eating ice cream. I put chocolate on here because that's my favorite. So you first have an antecedent stimulus, so an SD. You have a bowl of food and a spoon on the table. So you got the ice cream on the table and a spoon. That's your SD. So the response the person makes is to pick up the spoon. And when they pick up the spoon is in their hand. So this consequence is what we refer to as a stimulus change. So picking up the spoon results in this consequence or this stimulus change. And this stimulus change serves as a reinforcer for picking up the spoon and the SD for the next behavior in the chain. So now the spoon is in the hand, and that's the SD for putting the spoon in the bowl. Once the spoon's in the bowl, it produces a stimulus change of the spoon is in the food. And that's the reinforcer for putting a spoon in the bowl and the SD for the next step. Once the spoon is in the food, you scoop the food into the spoon, and now the food is on the spoon. And so the food is on the spoon is a reinforcer for this third behavior and an SD for the fourth behavior. Fourth behavior is lifting the spoonful of food and putting it in your mouth. The reinforcer is eating the food. And so typically this last response in the chain is a natural outcome of the chain. So putting the food in the mouth, the reinforcer for that is the natural outcome, getting to eat the food, getting to eat the ice cream. And so you guys can see this is broken down in lots of detail. So the bowl of spoon, the food and the spoon on the table, it's broken down into picking up the spoon, putting the spoon in the bowl, scooping the food onto the spoon, and lifting the spoon and putting the food in the mouth. And these breakdowns of the different components within the skill is what we call a task analysis. And I'm talking about that in a second. But so let me go back to behavioral chain. Important characteristics of your chain is it involves the performance of a specific series of discrete responses. So you can take this complex behavior and you can break it down to a sequence of discrete responses that the person needs to emit. The performance of each behavior in the sequence produces that change in the environment, so a reinforcer for that behavior and an SD for the next behavior. And then the responses are typically performed in a specific sequence, and usually in temporal succession. So if you look back at our behavioral chain with our eating ice cream, all these behaviors need to be done in the correct sequence. You can't with the spoon and put it in your mouth without putting the spoon in the bowl or without scooping the food onto the spoon. So the responses are performed in a specific sequence. Okay, so what I mentioned earlier is when you take this complex skill and you break it down into its little components, that's what we call a task analysis. The task analysis is, the technical definition is a written list of all stimulus response units of a behavioral chain. So you have the stimulus and the response. And then remember, the response produces that stimulus change, that consequence, that becomes the reinforcer for the response, and the stimulus or the SD for the next step in the chain. And this is, your task analysis is always your first step of teaching a chain. So the first time you have a complex skill and you want to use chaining, you want to go through and do your task analysis and break it down into its individual components. So what's the stimulus? What's the response? What's the next stimulus? What's the response? And you want to break it down. The size of the unit depends on your learner. So if you have a more advanced learner, your steps might be a little bigger. If you have a really low functioning learner, you might have a lot more steps. So, you know, our example with our ice cream, that was pretty detailed. So that might be more for a low functioning learner. And, if you look at this example, so this is putting mayo on bread, and so you can see it's broken down really in lots of detail, lots of steps. If you have a more advanced learner, you might be able to skip some of these. So, putting the knife in the hand, or, grabbing the knife, you might be able to just go straight to putting the knife into the mayo jar, skipping mayo on the knife. You might be able to have less steps and combine some of these. The way you figure out these steps, you can do a couple different things. You can perform the task yourself and write down each of the steps. You can observe a competent person doing it, or you can also consult an expert, and maybe you know somebody that has done a task analysis of that specific skill before, that has been broken down really further a lot. You can contact them. Any one of those are good ways to get your task analysis. Now, I want to make a note that it's not necessary that for your learner to be able to read or understand your task analysis. So the learner actually doesn't have to understand language at all. This is for you. This is for you to know, how do I break this skill down and how do I teach it? So this is, your skill acquisition plan for teaching a complex behavioral chain. Here's an example of another behavioral chain, behavioral chain, task analysis of a behavioral chain. So this is wiping your face. So turning on your sink, holding the washcloth under the water, pumping the soap under the washcloth, rubbing the sides of the washcloth together, rubbing your face, leaning over sink, splashing your water. And you can see how this complex skill is broken down. Okay, whenever you want to teach these different components of the skill that you've broken down into your task analysis, that's what we actually call chaining. So chaining involves the systematic application of prompting and fading strategies to teach each stimulus response component in the chain. So you have this complex task, you've broken it down, and you've done your task analysis, you have the stimulus response components, and chaining involves a systematic way you're actually going to teach those components in the chain. And to do this, we use our prompting and fading strategies. And so this is just the basic strategy of chaining. So you're going to present your initial instruction, for example, make a sandwich. And then you're going to present the instruction for each step you're teaching. So open the refrigerator, get out the mayo, get out the mustard, open the pantry, get out the bread, open the drawer, get out a knife. If the learner doesn't engage in the specific component, then you're going to use your prompts. You're going to praise, if the learner engages after your instruction, prompted response, praise, and then, depending upon where you are in the prompt sequence, then you might if you do prompt and it's at the beginning, you want to praise the correct responses even if they're prompted, and then you want to fade out those prompts. When the behavior occurs without the prompts, then you want to move to the next step. And we have 3 general strategies for actually putting the components of your task analysis together, or 3 different strategies for chaining. So the first one I want to talk about is backward chaining. So with backward chaining, you're going to teach the last step first. So you, the teacher, typically completes all the steps except for the last. And you can either complete them on your own, or you do your full-on prompts until you get to the very last step. For example, say you're trying to teach the person how to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so you complete the last step without prompting. So you're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you'll prompt the client to say 6. And then you want to fade out the prompt for 6. Once the client is reliably saying 6, then you want to complete all but the last 2. So you want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, prompt your 5. Once the learner says 5, they can say 6. And so then once they're reliably saying 5 with the prompt, fade out that prompt, and you're going to teach 4. So you're teaching this last step first. You're prompting on these, you're teaching the last one. Once they do it independently, you move to the second to the last step, and so on until you get to the very beginning. This is a really good chaining strategy to use when there's a good natural reinforcer at the end of the chain, or when the task termination is a reinforcer. If you have a really good reinforcer at the end of the chain, then the person comes into contact with that natural reinforcer, and it's something that they want. And so since it is a natural reinforcer, that's the best type of reinforcer. And so when there is that natural reinforcer, backward chaining is a really good strategy to use. I have a video for you guys in your module, and it talks about how to do hand washing with backward chaining, so you guys can go on and watch that. Okay, let's see. Wait, let's talk about our eating ice cream example that we talked about earlier. So I've kind of condensed the task analysis. So the stimulus is we have a bowl of food, a spoon on the table, pick up the spoon's in our hand, we put the spoon on the bowl, the spoon's in the food, we scoop the food onto the spoon, we hold the food on the spoon, and then we lift the food and put it in our mouth. And the reinforcer for that is we get to eat the ice cream. So I want you guys to think about how you would do backward chaining with this example. And so the answer is that you would physically prompt each of these responses typically, and then you would start to phase your prompt for this last step. So, if you're doing physical prompting, you might, start to do those partial prompts until the person is lifting the food by themselves and putting it in their mouth. And of course, they get the reinforcer, they get eat ice cream. And so after they're doing this independently, and it might be a model, you might be doing model prompts and you fade to verbal, and then they're doing it independently. We talked about the different ways to fade out those prompts, either within your prompts modality or across prompts. Once they're reliably doing this last step, you're going to phase your prompt for the second to last step. So phase your prompt for scooping the food onto the spoon. Once they're reliably doing that, they lift the food, put it in their mouth, and they get to eat ice cream. So you guys can see every time they're doing this behavioral chain, they're getting to contact that natural reinforcer and they're getting to eat the ice cream, which is great. Forward chaining is when you provide a reinforcer after each response in the chain. And so you're essentially teaching the first step first, and then you're adding one step at a time. So you teach the first step, provide the reinforcer, and then what happens is when you teach the next step, that response, so the response produces an outcome or the consequence, and you're going to provide a reinforcer for that. So the outcome becomes paired with the reinforcer, and therefore the outcome becomes a condition reinforcer, and that essentially guides them through the chain. So with forward chaining, if we go back to our example of teaching 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're first going to teach 1, provide a reinforcer, then you're going to teach 1, 2, and once the person is reliably saying 1, 2, then you're going to teach 1, 2, 3, and so on. So you teach that first step first, and then add one step at a time. You want to use this if your learner can already perform most of the steps, but doesn't have them chained together, or if the first steps in the chain are the easiest. So those are the reasons why you would use forward chaining. So let's go back to our example with ice cream in the bowl. So I want you guys to think about how you would use forward chaining for this example. And the first one is the answer is you would teach this first step first. So you would prompt, you had the bowl of food and spoon on the table. You would prompt them to pick up the spoon, and then you would fade that prompt. Once they're reliably picking up the spoon, And you can do this different ways. I think most people, when they would do this, they would prompt this whole sequence, but then you would fade out the prompt for the first step. Once they're reliably pick up the spoon, then you would, so they pick up the spoon, you prompt them to put it in the bowl, prompt them to scoop it out, and prompt them to lift it and put it in their mouth. After they're reliably picking up on their own, you would prompt them to put it in the bowl, and so on. Okay, the last step is what we call total task presentation. This is when you teach the entire chain without actually requiring mastery of one step at a time. So remember, with forward and backward, you're either teaching the last step. Once they master it, you move on to the second to last step. Or with forward chaining, you're teaching the first step. Once they master the first step, you go on to the second step. With total task presentation, you're going to do each step in the chain, and you're going to prompt each step as needed. So, you know, when we talked about our guidelines earlier, you're going to provide that verbal instruction. Open the refrigerator. If the person does it, great. Pull out the mayo. If they don't do it, you're going to provide a prompt. And then you're going to go to the next step, and you're going to provide the instruction. If they can do it, great. If not, you prompt them. So you prompt each step as you needed. So you're going through each step each time you do the behavioral chain. And typically you use total task presentation for more higher functioning learners. This is a lot of times what parents use when they try to use behavioral chaining, teachers and things like that. And so it is useful for higher functioning learners, or when you have a pretty simple or brief chain. The downfall to total task is that it results in the most errors. And that's why you really don't want to use it for your lower functioning learners or for chains that are more complex. And that when you're learning, we talked about errorless teaching and most least prompting. When you're learning a new skill or you're learning a new sequence, you want to make the least amount of errors possible. And so since this strategy results in the most errors, this is used for more your higher functioning learners. You don't want an early learner to be making a lot of errors. Okay, so total task presentation. How you would do this one is you would tell the person to pick up the spoon. If they did it, great. If not, you would prompt. You would tell the person to put the spoon in the bowl. If they did it, great. You move on to the next step. If not, you would prompt. You would tell the person to scoop the food onto the spoon. If they did it, great. If not, you would prompt. And then lift the food and put it in your mouth. If they did it, great. If not, you would prompt. Alright, I have a video for you guys in your module that kind of goes through all the different chaining strategies and gives you guys some more resources and some more information on them. So please watch that in your modules as well. Okay, some similarities and differences between those strategies. Similarities, they're all used to teach complex tasks or change of behavior. With all of them, your first step is always that task analysis. So regardless of what strategy, you always want to do that task analysis. And then prompting and fading is used in all three procedures. The differences is in total task presentation, the learner is prompted through the entire task in each learning trial. In forward chaining and backward chaining, the teacher teaches one component of the chain at a time and then chains the components together, essentially. Forward chaining, you're teaching that first step. Backward chaining, you're teaching the last step. And there are some other training strategies. You can, especially if you have more advanced learners, you can do a written task analysis. If you guys like to cook, when you read a recipe, that's a written task analysis. The learner reads each step, performs it, and that written analysis serves as the prompt. You can do picture prompts, so you can prompt them with pictures as to what they're supposed to be doing. This happens a lot with, we ran programs with hand washing and things like that we use picture prompts with our more higher functioning kids. If you guys do Legos, a lot of times they use picture prompts to have them complete what the Legos should look like if they complete an alligator. Also, if you put together a piece of furniture, a lot of times there are picture prompts as well, picture prompts and a written task analysis. You can use video modeling as well, and then you can provide self-instructions or rules. So you can teach the kid rules for them to prompt themselves to engage in the correct components of the chain. So some chaining guidelines. You want to make sure that chaining is appropriate. So you need to make sure that you can break it down into its components if it's a more complex skill. You want to develop that task analysis. You want to get a baseline assessment of the learner's ability, and that's going to tell you, which strategy you should use, how much you need to break down your task analysis, and things like that. What step do you need to start with, etc. Choose your chaining method, implement the chaining procedure, and then after they're engaging in the complex skill, you want to continue reinforcement after the behavior is learned. Remember, you want to, during acquisition, it should be a continuous reinforcement schedule. And even after the behavior is learned, you want to continually reinforce the behavior to make sure that they are continuing to engage in it. Once they're reliably engaging in that complex skill, then you can start to fade out your reinforcement schedule. So you can thin out your reinforcement schedule. Okay guys, so we talked about shaping, we talked about chaining, we talked about the task analysis with chaining, we talked about forward chaining, backward chaining, and then your total task presentation or total task analysis. So, alright guys, that is it for this class. So please let me know if you guys have any questions. We will be meeting on Thursday, and please go into Top Hat and answer your 3 participation questions for this video lecture, and then also go into your module and watch those videos that I mentioned that I want you guys to watch in this video. So yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions, and we can also go over anything that you guys want me to on Thursday. Alright, thanks guys.